James Wilson loved his job at the White House, working with roses, lawns, seasonal flowers. It was a quiet, unassuming job. No one knew that the bullet wound in his leg was one he received while protecting three presidents. No one remembered that 20 years ago, he was one of the best Secret Service agents. And now, as assassins scaled the fence, the agent inside Wilson was awakening again. Welcome to the Human Stories. Before we begin today's story, tell me in the comments which city you're watching from. And if you believe stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button to support us. The White House, the heart of Washington, D.C., the symbol of America's power and history. Every day, hundreds of visitors admired the magnificent gardens and the historic building. This white neoclassical structure, rising at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, was not just a building but the soul of a nation. Tourists took photos, security officers patrolled, officials rushed to their meetings, and amidst all this commotion, one man worked quietly. James Wilson, the White House's head gardener. Wilson was 63 years old, a man of medium height with sun-tanned skin and neatly cut silver hair. His blue eyes were lined with wrinkles, traces of his age and the long hours he spent outdoors. His hands bore the marks of years of work, calloused, strong hands. He walked with a slight drag in his right leg, telling those who asked that it was a remnant of an old injury. His brown gardener's uniform was always clean and ironed. Everyone thought he was just a quiet man who cared for gardens, flowers, and trees. He had been working at the White House for 10 years. Every morning, he arrived at 5:30, first passing through the security check at the East Gate, showing his ID, then heading to the gardener's shed. He would first check the rose garden, then inspect the south lawn. He arrived at the White House before the visitors, before the security officers, even before the president, and he was usually the last to leave. As the sun set, he would water the flowers one last time, gather his tools, and quietly depart. Wilson's routine never changed. On Mondays, he mowed the north lawn. On Tuesdays, he fought pests in the rose garden. On Wednesdays, he checked the exotic plants in the Jacqueline Kennedy garden. On Thursdays, he trimmed the shrubs along the presidential path, and on Fridays, he maintained the irrigation systems. On weekends, unless there were special events, he took care of the general cleaning of the gardens. The White House staff loved and respected Wilson. Security officers joked with him. Chefs asked for fresh herbs from the garden. Occasionally, even the president would visit him and ask questions about the garden. Wilson was always polite, always professional, but he never talked too much, never drew attention to himself. He was the silent guardian of the gardens. No one knew his real story. No one remembered that James Wilson was actually Agent James Wilson, one of the best protection agents of the Secret Service. 20 years ago, while protecting three different presidents, he had neutralized countless threats, prevented 3 assassination attempts. He was once a legend of the protection detail. Young agents aspired to be like him. Presidents slept with the comfort of knowing he was on duty, until that day in Brazil when an assassin's bullet hit his right leg. Wilson had protected the president. He had shielded him with his own body, neutralized the assassin. But the cost had been heavy. The bullet had shattered the main nerve in his leg. 3 surgeries, 6 months of rehabilitation, but his leg was never the same again. He could no longer serve in the field. Secret Service doctors recommended he be removed from active duty. When offered desk duty, he had politely declined. "I'm a field man, not a paper man," he had said. And so he had retired from the Secret Service, received training in gardening, and now returned to the place he loved, the White House, with a different mission. For Wilson, this wasn't just a job. It was a mission, a different way to serve, a different way to protect. Maybe he no longer carried a gun. Maybe he no longer wore that iconic Secret Service earpiece. But he was still at the White House, still watching every day, checking for anything unusual. And every day, while working in the garden, his eyes scanned the fences, the gates, the cameras. Old habits die hard. That Wednesday evening, Wilson was doing his final checks in the rose garden as usual. The clock showed 8:30 p.m. It was the early days of autumn. The air was slightly cool. The sky was clear. Stars were shining. The White House gleamed like a white jewel in the night with the help of surrounding lights. The president was working late in the Oval Office. His wife and children were in the residence section upstairs. Security was tight as usual. Agents patrolling around, sharpshooters positioned at strategic points, cameras constantly scanning the images. Wilson noticed signs of disease on the leaves of one of the roses. He bent down, examined it carefully. Powdery mildew, he muttered to himself. He would need to prepare a special mixture of treatment tomorrow. Just then, a faint sound caught his attention. With the instinct given by years of experience, Wilson immediately froze and listened. The sound was coming from the fence side of the south lawn. Normally, sounds from outside wouldn't be heard at such a late hour. Security barriers kept tourists and noise away. Wilson slowly straightened up, put his shears in his pocket, and silently moved toward the source of the sound. The south lawn was the backyard of the White House, a wide, flat, perfectly maintained grassy area. The president's helicopter would land here. State ceremonies were held here. And now in the darkness, Wilson saw dark silhouettes moving on the other side of the fence. Wilson's heart rate increased, but he still appeared calm on the outside. His Secret Service training had kicked in. When faced with danger, first assess, then act. He looked carefully from among the shadows. Yes, definitely human. 4 people dressed in black, approaching the fences. He immediately took out his cell phone to call the White House Security Center, but his phone had no signal. Damn, he thought. There was always a signal problem in this part of the garden. That old oak tree in the rose garden blocked the signals. He had reported this problem numerous times, but it still hadn't been fixed. Wilson thought for a moment. What he should do was immediately go into the building and raise the alarm, but his instincts were telling him something else. Judging by the activity at the fence, they didn't have time. By the time he went inside and called for help, it might be too late. 20 years ago, he would have acted without hesitation. He would have drawn his gun, neutralized the threat. But now, he only had garden shears in his hand. His leg was hurting. His reflexes weren't as fast as they used to be. He was 63 years old now, a retired agent. But still, that agent inside him was awake. And still, his protection oath was valid. I, James Wilson, swear to put my life on the line to protect the President of the United States, his family, and the White House. Wilson silently moved across the lawn, approaching the fences. Now he could see more clearly. There were 4 of them, dressed in black, faces masked. They looked professional. This wasn't an ordinary infiltration attempt. 2 of them had weapons, compact pistols, probably with silencers. The other 2 were trying to cut the fence, with special alloy cutters, electric wire cutters. This was a professional operation. His training kicked in. Wilson moved out of their line of sight, heading toward the small shed next to the rose garden. He was fast but silent. With the advantage of having worked in the garden for years, he knew where to step, which branch would make a sound. The shed was like a small cabin, wooden, painted green, covered with vines. Tourists usually didn't even notice it. Wilson opened the door and went inside. In the shed were garden tools, fertilizers, and various equipment. Hoes, shovels, rakes, pruning shears. But Wilson wasn't looking for any of these. Behind the shelves was a small compartment. Under normal circumstances, it wouldn't be noticed. It looked like part of the wall. Wilson used a key he kept on a chain around his neck, unlocked it. Inside was a small metal box that he had placed there years ago. He opened the box. Inside was a gun and 2 magazines from the old days. A Glock 19, the standard Secret Service weapon. When leaving the Secret Service, Wilson had instinctively left a security measure here. Just in case, he had told himself. And now that moment of need had come. Wilson took the gun in his hand. The cold metal was a familiar feeling. How many times had he drawn this gun? How many times had he fired it? He had forgotten the count, but his body remembered how his hand fit the grip of the gun, the feel of his finger on the trigger. He checked the gun, inserted the magazine. It was still in perfect condition. He had maintained it regularly. He took a deep breath, prepared his mind. It had been 20 years since he had fired a gun, but some things are never forgotten. He left the shed, moved quickly in the darkness. The attackers had now cut through the fence and were entering the south lawn. Wilson made a quick assessment of their movement. All 4 moved professionally. They had probably received military training. 2 were in front, scouting. The other 2 were behind, providing security. Their target was clear, the section containing the president's bedroom, right on the garden-facing side. Wilson used the shadows of the garden to approach without drawing the attacker's attention. He was using the advantage of having worked here every day for years. He knew every tree, every bush, every blind spot by heart. While working in the garden, he had always thought of such scenarios. If someone comes from here, where do I hide? Which window does this tree see? As the first attacker moved across the lawn, Wilson acted. He approached silently, neutralized the man with a single move. An old Secret Service technique, a sudden strike to the throat, cutting off his breath but not causing permanent damage. The attacker collapsed to the ground. Wilson took his weapon and tucked it behind his belt. Now there were 3 left. The second attacker noticed his friend's disappearance and anxiously looked around. He whispered into his radio, "Mark, Mark, where are you?" Wilson used a different tactic this time. He turned on the garden hose, directing the water right at the attacker's face. The man stumbled backward in surprise, his eyes blinded by the water. Wilson seized this opportunity and neutralized him too, a quick strike, causing the man to lose consciousness. The remaining 2 attackers were now aware of the situation. They drew their weapons, started looking around. "Who's there?" called one, his voice tense and full of alarm. Wilson didn't answer. He moved behind a statue in the garden, controlled his breathing. Like in the old days, he cleared his mind, focused. He readied his weapon. His old leg was aching, but adrenaline had taken over his body. Right now, he was like James Wilson from 20 years ago. Focused, ready, lethal. "The security alarm didn't go off," said one attacker to the other. "We still have time." "But where are Mark and Dave?" asked the other. "Their radios aren't responding." "I don't know, but our mission is clear. Let's proceed. We need to reach the president's bedroom in 30 seconds. Wilson could hear their conversation. This was an assassination attempt, and the target was directly the president. The attackers were moving toward the path leading to the president's bedroom. There was no luxury of waiting anymore. Wilson emerged from behind the statue, pointed his gun. "Secret Service, drop your weapons and put your hands in the air," he shouted, his voice carrying the authority of years. The attackers were surprised, but instead of dropping their weapons, they turned toward Wilson. They fired first, bullets passing by Wilson, embedding in a tree trunk. Wilson threw himself to the ground, took cover behind a bush. Bullets passed over his head, tearing leaves and branches. His old leg was protesting, but adrenaline was suppressing the pain. Wilson took aim and fired. His first shot hit one of the attackers in the shoulder. The man fell to the ground, moaning in pain. The other attacker began firing around in panic, but Wilson remained calm. In his second shot, he hit the other attacker's weapon. The gun fell to the ground, and the man clutched his hand and backed away. "I'm telling you for the last time, lie down," shouted Wilson. Just then, the White House alarm system activated. Red lights began flashing, sirens sounded. Wilson's gunshots had finally caught the attention of a security officer. Security personnel began running in from everywhere. "Lie down! Put your hands behind your head!" Wilson shouted at the attackers. This time they obeyed. The wounded one lay on the ground moaning, and the other, realizing he was unarmed, surrendered. Within seconds, Secret Service agents surrounded the area. Armed teams encircled the attackers. Floodlights turned on, illuminating the south lawn like daylight. Wilson lowered his gun, took a deep breath. Now he could feel the pain in his leg. It was burning. "Hands up!" "Drop your weapon!" shouted a Secret Service agent toward Wilson. Wilson slowly placed the gun on the ground, raised his hands. "James Wilson, White House gardener," he said calmly. One of the agents approached, still pointing his gun at Wilson. "Show your ID." Wilson pulled out his gardener ID from his pocket. The agent looked at the ID, then at Wilson. He couldn't hide his surprise. "What's a gardener doing with a gun?" "Long story," said Wilson, "but I think it's time to tell it now." The agents took Wilson to the security office. There he was interrogated for hours. His identity was verified, his background was investigated. Old Secret Service files were opened, pulled from dusty archives, and slowly James Wilson's story emerged. Young agents couldn't believe their eyes as they read his file. His courage while protecting President Reagan, how he prevented an assassination attempt on President Clinton, how he saved President Bush from a bomb attack. And finally, that fateful day in Brazil, how he was shot, how he still protected the president, and then how he quietly disappeared. In the morning hours, Wilson was sitting in the Oval Office. Across from him was the President of the United States. On the president's face was an expression of surprise and gratitude. "Mr. Wilson," said the president, "the security chief just told me everything. Your career in the Secret Service, preventing assassination attempts, your injury, and then quietly returning to the White House as a gardener." Why? Wilson thought for a moment. How could he explain to the president? How could he describe that unquenchable fire inside a protection agent, that never-ending responsibility? "Because I love this place, Mr. President, the place I swore to protect. The bullet in my leg prevented me from serving in the field, but it didn't change my oath. I just continued to protect in a different way. For 10 years, no one knew your real identity." Wilson smiled slightly. "Gardeners are invisible, Mr. President. No one wonders who a gardener is. It was a good camouflage. And last night, how did you know? How did you notice? Sound, Mr. President, the sound of the fence being cut. And then movement. I'm in that garden every day. I notice every change. Also, old habits die hard. During my 20 years in the Secret Service, I learned to always watch the surroundings." The president stood up, walked to the window. Outside, security personnel were still patrolling the south lawn. The attackers had been taken away. Evidence was being collected. "The intelligence report came in," said the president. "What happened last night was a coordinated assassination attempt. The 4 attackers were just the advance team. If they had been successful, more would have come." The president turned to Wilson. "If it weren't for you, someone else would have stopped them," said Wilson modestly. "Maybe, but today, you stopped them." The president returned to his desk, opened a file. "The security chief wants to bring you back to active duty. What do you think? Would you like to return to the Secret Service?" Wilson rubbed his legs slightly. His age and injury were no longer suitable for active duty, but perhaps there could be another role. "Thank you, Mr. President, but I'm a gardener now, and honestly, I like roses more than guns." The president nodded understandingly. "Well, then what can we do? How can we honor a hero like you?" Wilson thought. He didn't want fame. He didn't want applause. He had just done his duty, as he had for years. But maybe, "You know that diseased rose in the rose garden? I need a special fertilizer mixture to save it. And maybe we could have a meeting to review the blind spots of security cameras. New blades for the lawnmower wouldn't be bad either." The president laughed. "Gardner Wilson, you really are a unique individual." "Thank you, Mr. President. I'm just doing my job." The next day, a small news item appeared in the Washington Post. "Security breach prevented at White House." The details in the news were limited, only stating that the attempt was thwarted thanks to an alert staff member. Wilson's name was not mentioned, and Wilson preferred it that way. That morning, he came to work at 5:30 as usual. He checked the rose garden, treated the diseased rose. He toured the south lawn, examined the damage to the fences. He took notes for new security measures. But something was different now. There was a new respect in the eyes of the security personnel as they greeted him. Young Secret Service agents stopped to talk with him. Even the president's children visited him, asking how they could help in the garden. Wilson found this attention a bit strange. He was used to being invisible, but maybe being visible for a while wasn't so bad either. In the afternoon, the new security chief of the Secret Service called him to her office. She was a young woman, perhaps in her 40s, with sharp eyes and a professional posture. "Mr. Wilson," said the chief, "after what happened last night, we want to work with you to identify security vulnerabilities in the White House garden. You know both the garden and security. This is a unique combination." Wilson considered the offer. This could be a perfect role for him. He could still take care of the garden, but at the same time contribute to the White House's security. He could combine his 2 worlds. "On the condition that I remain a gardener," he said. "Of course," said the chief, smiling. "Gardner Wilson and Agent Wilson, a 2-person team." And so James Wilson continued to live in both worlds. During the day, he beautified the White House gardens, and at night, he reviewed security plans. New cameras were installed, Old blind spots were closed. Every tree, every bush in the garden was now evaluated not only for aesthetics, but also for security. Wilson began holding weekly meetings with young Secret Service agents. He told them about the White House garden, showed them potential threat points. The agents admired Wilson's experience. His simple but effective approach taught them much more than complex security systems. The garden is like a shield, Wilson would say. If you use it correctly, it protects you. If you use it incorrectly, it becomes your enemy. The staff now looked at him with a different respect. Security officers saluted, chefs prepared special meals, and even the president stopped for a short chat every morning. Tourists still didn't notice him, and Wilson was content with both roles. A month later, a ceremony was held on the South Lawn. The president presented Wilson with the Presidential Medal of Freedom. The official reason for the ceremony was extraordinary services to the White House gardens. But everyone present knew the real reason. As the president pinned the medal on Wilson's chest, he said, "Mr. Wilson, in presenting you with this medal, I thank you not just for your service over the past month, but for the extraordinary courage and dedication you've shown throughout your entire career. You are the embodiment of American ideals, quiet strength, resilience, and above all, the determination to serve." Wilson humbly bowed his head. "Thank you, Mr. President. This honor is too great for me." After the ceremony, Wilson returned to his garden. With his shears in hand, he continued pruning the roses. A tourist group passed by, the guide telling them about the history of the White House. None of them knew that the old gardener they were passing had just received the country's highest civilian honor, had saved the lives of 3 presidents, and had prevented an assassination attempt just a month ago. And James Wilson preferred it exactly that way. Quiet, invisible, but always there. As a gardener, as a protector. In the evening, when he returned home, Wilson sat in the silence of his small apartment. Old photographs hanging on the wall told his story, his first day as a young Secret Service agent, a photo taken with President Reagan, a memory with his old team members. And now a new photo had been added to these, a frame captured while the president was pinning a medal on him. Wilson looked at the photo and smiled. Life sometimes rewarded people in the most unexpected ways. Being a gardener had started as just a camouflage for him, but over time, it had turned into a real passion. Growing plants, giving life, watching them grow. This was, in a way, a different version of his protection duty, and perhaps this would be his true legacy. Not with a gun, but with a shovel. Not with bullets, but with seeds. Creating life instead of saving it. As the new day dawned, Wilson got up early as usual. Today he would apply a special treatment for that diseased rose in the rose garden. And then he would oversee the placement of new security cameras on the South Lawn. Before leaving home, he took one last look at the photographs on the wall. He had come a long way since his youth, but some things had never changed. His sense of duty, his desire to serve, and above all, his protective instinct. "It's going to be another beautiful day," he said to himself and closed the door behind him. When he arrived at the White House, he stopped at the South Lawn, looked at the place where last night's events had occurred. The damage to the fence had been repaired, the grass had been cleaned. But Wilson still remembered what had happened there. The attackers, the gunshots, the danger. And then his gaze turned to the rose garden. The roses had started to bloom, colorful, vibrant, full of life. Wilson smiled. This is why he loved this job. Even after danger, life continued. The roses still bloomed, the birds still sang, the sun still rose. Wilson walked toward the gardener's shed, began preparing the day's tools. Today, he would be a little more careful than usual, his eyes a little sharper, his ears a little more alert. Because he wasn't just a gardener, he was the silent guardian of the White House, and his duty would never end. That same afternoon, as Wilson was working in the rose garden, 2 young Secret Service agents approached him. One was a woman, one was a man. Both were wearing their official uniforms, standing with a professional air. "Mr. Wilson," said the female agent, "we've been assigned to the new team. Could you show us the security points in the garden?" Wilson straightened up, cleaned his hands. "Of course," he said. "I have a lot to show you." And so the old agent began passing his wisdom to the new generation. He showed them the weak points in the fences, the blind spots of the cameras, potential infiltration points. But at the same time, he also told them how to care for the roses when each flower bloomed, which tree provided the best shade. Because true protection was not just seeing the danger, but also understanding the value of what was being protected. The young agents listened carefully to Wilson's every word. For them, this was not just training, it was an honor, learning the secrets of the White House from the legendary Agent Wilson. At the end of the day, Wilson returned to the gardener's shed, put away his tools. He took notes for tomorrow, wrote down the tasks to be done, and then, as always, he took one last look at the garden. As the sun was setting, the white walls of the White House had turned golden. The roses looked even more beautiful in the evening light. The grass swayed slightly in the wind, and in the distance, the American flag waved proudly. Wilson saw this view every day, but it had never become ordinary. Each time, as if seeing it for the first time, he admired its beauty, and each time he renewed his oath to protect it. A few months later, as Wilson was working in the garden, a school group came for a tour. The children were running around in the garden, taking photos, laughing. Wilson watched them with a smile. The children's joy added a special liveliness to the garden. A teacher from the group approached Wilson. "Excuse me, Mr. Wilson," she said. "You're that hero, aren't you? I read about it in the newspaper last month. The gardener who saved the White House from attackers." Wilson blushed slightly. "I just did my job, ma'am. Would you say a few words to my students? You would be a great inspiration for them." Wilson hesitated. He had never been one to make speeches, but the curious eyes of the children convinced him. "Hello, kids," said Wilson, approaching the group. "My name is James. I'm the gardener here." The children excitedly surrounded him. "Did you really stop the bad guys?" asked a little girl. Wilson smiled. "Sometimes, at the most unexpected times, the most unexpected people can become heroes," he said. "What's important is to be ready to do the right thing, and always to protect those around you." "Aren't you afraid?" asked another child. "Fear is good," said Wilson. "It reminds us to be careful, but we shouldn't let fear stop us, especially when it comes to protecting those we love." The children had gathered around Wilson, listening with admiration. He was giving them simple but powerful lessons about courage, duty, honor, and most of all, about invisible heroes. "Sometime," said Wilson, "the greatest heroes are those who are never noticed. Your mailman, your teacher, your school janitor, all of them in their own ways work to make the world a better place." As the children internalized these words, Wilson's eyes scanned the garden. Everything was normal, everything was safe, and he was exactly where he needed to be. A year later, there was a change of staff at the White House. A new president had been elected. New faces, new voices, new policies. But in the garden, some things didn't change. James Wilson was still there, still pruning the roses, still checking the south lawn. The new president found him working in the garden one morning. "Mr. Wilson," said the president, "I've heard a lot about you. The previous president spoke highly of you." Wilson bowed his head. "Thank you, Mr. President. I'm at your service. We hope you'll stay with us. The White House needs loyal employees like you." Wilson smiled. "I'm not going anywhere, Mr. President. This garden is my home." And indeed, for Wilson, the White House garden was not just a job, but a home where he knew every corner, every plant, every stone, every blade of grass. And he would continue to protect this home, sometimes with shears, sometimes with a shovel, and when necessary with a gun. Because sometimes the most ordinary-looking people have the most extraordinary stories. And sometimes a hero's greatest strength is the ability to be invisible. What about you? Have you ever thought about who those ordinary people around you really are? Perhaps that mailman passing by, your cashier, or your gardener once changed the world. Perhaps the greatest heroes are those who are never recognized. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories like this. Until our next story, take another look at the ordinary people around you, because nothing is as it seems.